hop into the waiting.
Yes, I can.
So happy New Year, everyone. Really excited, delighted to be with you for today's masterclass. Just reflecting, in the lead up to this about the thing that I enjoy most in my role here at Lighthouse, and probably been working with leadership teams on a pretty dedicated basis for the last 7 years. And it's just some of the most difficult at times, rewarding all the time, and mostly high impact sort of work that we get to do. You can just see the impact of getting the leadership team, or for that matter, any team, but especially the leadership team, aligned and moving in a common direction, and how that can really accelerate the organization. So really happy to be with you all here today. As we look back on 22 for just a minute, 2022 in a lot of ways was pretty hard. We were all constantly overcoming challenges, engaging in more and more hybrid work, managing supply chains, watching inflation, looking at interest rate rises. So all these things happening all at once. And I hope each of you found the way to really take a few days, hopefully more than a few, to recharge coming into 23. I think 23 will be absolutely filled with its own set of challenges. It'd be great to have a rosy economic picture in front of us and a set of social and environmental factors that we're all perfectly in tune, but that's just not the case. So in an organizational context, oftentimes we'll see a lot of organizations cutting back, cutting costs. And while we do need to be mindful of these things, we know that the winners find ways to create value in challenging times. So you investing your time here indicates that hopefully you're going to be some of the folks that are leading your teams to great outcomes this year. So teams, as we know, are increasingly important. I just saw some research that suggests that 70% of organizational value is created through teams, which probably isn't surprising when we stop to think about it, but it does show us the importance of teams, teamwork, teaming, when 70% of the value created by our organizations are generated by teams. And leadership teams, as we'll look at today, have a real disproportionate impact on outcomes. So while working with any team is critical, leadership teams are especially important. Now, today, this is a masterclass. You've chosen to invest your time, and experience shows that the more you engage, not only the more value you'll get, but the more value for the other people who are with us in the masterclass. And so specifically, today's an opportunity for you to learn the 4 key factors needed for leadership teams to thrive, to assess your own leadership team or the team you have on your mind right now as we sit here. Assess that team against these 4 factors. We're going to look at 4 case studies that map back to the 4 factors for success. And then lastly, you'll have a chance to develop your own plan. So wherever you're sitting in the organization, a plan, just a few actions that you might be able to take to move your team forward. So at this point, ideally, everyone has a team in mind. And so just, can you please use the Zoom tool to put a virtual thumbs up? You should see that on your Zoom screen. Put a virtual thumbs up when you have a team in mind that you are going to be thinking about in today's masterclass. So I'll keep us going, but be sure to be thinking about a particular team so that you can get the most value. So look, this requires your engagement, so I can see those thumbs. Thank you. So ideally, to the extent we can, let's have our cameras on because this is a masterclass. We're going to all benefit from one another's contributions. Definitely come off of mute whenever you think you need to or want to make a comment. I've got 3 polls that I want you to participate in because I need to understand who's in the room, the virtual room, so I can give you what you need the most. If you haven't yet, complete the assessment on your team because that'll be important for you to get all the value. And we will absolutely stay on time and finish at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And speaking of polls, we're going to start with one right now. I want to know who we have in our midst today. So here's the poll that I've just launched. I've asked you 3 questions. Question 1, what industry are you here today representing? Question 2, what's the size of the enterprise, the size of the business? And question 3, the team on your mind. What sort of team is it? So I'll give you a moment to just respond to those questions. 3 questions in our poll right now. Let's see how we're going. Great, starting to see some completion percentages track up. So we're about 1/3 of the way done. So please keep completing this poll. I want to get the percentage complete to at least 80%. So for those who might have just popped into our session, we're doing a poll to see who is with us today. So we're at about, great, we're at 72% completion. I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to complete that poll. Let's get this thing into the 80s here. 75%, thank you. Few more of you, please complete that. Again, if you've just joined us, we're trying to get a flavor for who's with us so we can really fine-tune the conversation. 79%. Okay, let's get one more participant to complete the poll, and then we'll keep moving. One more, anyone? Now I'm cheating. I'll show you the results in a second. We have a wide distribution of participants here today, which is great. All right, well, we're at 79%. Let's show you these results. So you can now see, as we look at the group that's gathered here today, we got a real spread of industries with no one, above 22%. So that's quite interesting. Real spread of industries, a real spread of the size of your businesses as well. A few more kind of probably below 500, right? That's probably something that's interesting. So there's a little bit of a distribution there. And then a few of you from larger businesses as well. And the team that's on your mind. So about half of you are thinking about your executive leadership team. Slightly less than that, your functional teams, and then one of you, a specific project team. So good. So that's going to help me shape the conversation today. So again, as we keep ourselves moving here, I'll stop sharing those results. Love it if you could really, really participate and get those cameras on and really participate as we keep going. So let's keep. So what's the kind of context that we're in? Now, many of you would be familiar with this phrase, right, or this acronym. It's quite popular in the business literature, VUCA. But perhaps we haven't had a chance to really unpick it and see how it applies to the teams and the organizations that we work with. So just to make sure that all of you walk out of this conversant with what's become quite a popular term, let's spend just a minute and unpick this phrase called VUCA. So interestingly, it actually originated from the U.S. Army War College, because that group was reflecting on the changes they were seeing in terms of the battles they were being asked to fight. And so VUCA has 4 elements to it. Volatility, and just reflecting on that for a second. So did you know that if you look back at the last 30 years of business, that half of the most turbulent financial quarters took place in the last 10 years? So a disproportionate amount of volatility in our economy has happened in the last 10 years. And that volatility has actually been persisting 4 times as long as it did 10 years ago. So when we have volatility, not only is it more common, but it's more lengthy. But we see this, right? Brands, businesses, they come and go faster than ever. And we do know that CEO tenure continues to decline as a result of this volatility. The second factor is uncertainty. And, you can only look at the environment that we're steering into for 2023, inflation, global recession, interest rates, consumer behavior. Are we going to have another pandemic flare-up? Is there going to be some new variant? So lots of uncertainty. I would argue that we've been dealing with so much uncertainty that we're a bit numb to it. It's kind of this underlying stress that from a chemical perspective probably has a lot of cortisol sitting in our systems. And we might not even know it, but we're probably all carrying around a lot of that chemical that deals with stress in our bodies, which is called cortisol, as a result of all the uncertainty in the environment. Complexity. Here, I think it's interesting to just reflect on the difference between something being complicated and something being complex. So my daughter just went back to the US from Sydney. She flew on an airline, a Boeing, that is an incredibly complicated machine. Incredible. It accomplishes something that 100 years ago could have never been done. It went from Sydney to Dallas in no stops. Now, while it's complicated, it can be figured out. You get the right engineers together, they can figure out the thrust, the velocity, the lift, everything about that can be figured out. That is different than complexity. Complexity is cause and effect, quite uncertain. Think about the weather. And if you're in New South Wales, the challenges of having a good forecast. I got wet the other day on my bike when certainly it was not supposed to rain. So weather is a complex system, and it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. That most people would say is the business environment that we're in as well. This cause and effect relationship is quite tenuous. And then lastly, ambiguity. And I don't know what you've noticed. I've noticed increasingly the need to make decisions without all the information that I would want. I need to make decisions, even in our business, without having the total picture. And interesting, this is known as the ambiguity effect. There's research that shows that we have a bias for imperfect information. We'd rather make a bad decision with all the information than a good decision that has missing information. So we have a bias already that leads us to struggle with ambiguity. So if nothing else, you're now better equipped to discuss with some expertise this concept of VUCA. But question for the group, and I'd love a couple of you to pop in here and make a comment by unmuting yourself. If that's the environment, why are leadership teams so important? I'd love 3 comments. So why is a leadership team so important in that environment?
I'll go first, Eric.
Thanks.
John Alton from MSD, or Merck Sharp and Dome. Stability and I suppose helping to provide focus when needed so that people don't get distracted by, the volatility, uncertainty of situations.
Thanks, John. So so that team needing to be the, I don't know, it's a bit metaphor, maybe the rock, right? So we can count on these people to kind of be that stable backbone of the organization. Great. What else? A couple more, please.
Eric, this is Alana from Teleflex Medical. I think another element is the different perspectives that a team brings to a decision.
Eric there for a sec.
Great. Thanks,
Sorry?
Alana. Go ahead, Alana.
Oh, sorry. Did you not hear me?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. So you heard what I said, the different perspectives that team members bring to making a decision. Yeah, so that hopefully you get as much information as possible, but you also get different perspectives and different opinions, which then help you to kind of drill down and focus and make sure that you've got it all covered.
Perfect. And to get all those contributions, we need a team environment with high trust and high psychological safety. So sometimes we have teams where the person with the best info actually stays quiet, which is a real shame. Thanks, Alana. One more, please.
It's Simon Cox here from Cushman's. I think that it's part of exactly what Alana just said around that broad base of experience and contribution. But I think that also, because of all those emotional adjectives that you use in VUCA, there's a real, and we've seen it in the last 2 years, potential for fear and then stagnation and then paralysis. And if you're operating a silo or as a bunch of individuals, there's nobody to come and chat to or put, and I think that's the human basis of leadership and teams that this unfolds. It's not about being technically brilliant. It's about being, I think, emotionally brilliant.
Wow, Simon, so much in what you just said. Yeah, it's a real trick actually getting all the dynamics right. But when we do, and this is, some of the research I'm just showing here, and as it relates to alignment of our teams, there's a lot of research that we can look at that demonstrates how important it is. I'm just going to pick 2 of these boxes just to illustrate. I'm going to start with the box that's navy blue, sort of on the bottom right part of the page. So this is some McKinsey research from their book, Leading Organizations, 10 Timeless Truths. Quite interesting. That top team working together toward the common vision nearly doubles the chance for that organization to have above median financial performance, nearly doubles. I'm sure they were disappointed not to get to 2, but that gives me more comfort in the research. So nearly doubles. The other one I love, and this really maps to our experience at Lighthouse working with teams, is your top left box. So as we work with leadership teams, we're always interviewing the team to try and understand the perspectives that they each have before we come into a room together. So interesting that in this example, when these 5 executives were asked to name the top priorities, they came up with 23, not 10, and only 2 were common across all 5 executives. So that demonstrates the challenge of alignment, potentially the challenge of alignment, that in a common executive team, we might have a whole lot of different opinions on what's most important. So the point there is that we got great research that we can rely on to kind of anchor the impact that we want to have through our leadership teams. So for those of you who have just joined us, welcome. Just moving through a little bit of a session. So now I want you to think about the team that you walked into our conversation today, right? So you had a team on your mind. That's why you put your virtual thumb up. And if you just joined us, please do have a particular team in mind. And I'm going to ask you, this is our next polling question. Think about that team. Think about the environment that we're dealing with. And now I'm going to ask you to choose one of 4 things. What does this team need right now as we sit here at the beginning of 2023? Does it need to launch? Is it a new team? Maybe you're launching a new product and there's a product market that has to be exploited. So you got to launch a new team. Maybe there's a new venture that needs to be launched. So is it a new team that needs to be launched? Does the team need to be relaunched? So this is where the team actually wasn't set up for success in the first place. So the team didn't really have a mandate. It didn't have clear stakeholders about what's required from the team, or perhaps it was poorly resourced. So does that team need to be relaunched to develop a different impact? Does it need to be refreshed? Are we just a bit exhausted potentially as a team? Or is there a new strategy? Maybe there's a new operating model. Whatever that thing is, does it need to be refreshed? Or fourthly, does it need to be rebuilt? Are there a significant number of new members on the team? Or perhaps trust has been broken. And so the emotional fabric of the team needs to be rebuilt. So this is our second poll. I'll get this poll moving. And tell us, as it relates to the team on your mind, what does that team need? A launch, a relaunch, a refresh, or a rebuild?
Eric, it's Alana again. Can you help me understand where where in these 4 options a team that needs to go from good to great sits? Because
Nice.
there's not necessarily a new team. I mean, the stakeholders are clear. All of these elements are met, but we need to move.
No, that's a common scenario. I should have included it. Let's put that in the refresh bucket, Alana, just for
Okay.
the sake of our conversation. That's a very common case, isn't it? So refresh would include, it's good, but it's got to get to great. Cool. We're at 77% complete. Let's keep a few more coming in. If you haven't yet responded, think about the team you're thinking about and tell us, what does it need? 83%, 87%. Give you one more second and we'll show those results. Great. We're just over 90%. Good work, everyone. So here's your results. So as it relates to the teams that you're thinking about, refresh, quite predominant, I'd say. A few launches, that's quite interesting. A few rebuilt, that takes a quite specific skill set and tool set, actually, when trust has been broken. So we may not cover that in detail today, but for those who are in that rebuild category, would love to connect with you separately. That's going to be a little different, perhaps, or a different flavor for what we're going to speak about today. So if we combine two of our polls, half of you are thinking about executive leadership teams, and half of you are thinking about refresh. So just for the sake of this conversation, we'll probably talk about how do you refresh an executive leadership team, which also, to Alana's point, includes this idea of moving that team from good to great. So cool. So what are we now building towards? If we're going to launch, how do we launch? If we're going to refresh, what are the things we need to think about refreshing? And what we'll now volunteer to you is the model that we use at Lighthouse. So in our experience and in the tool set that we enjoy using, there are 4 factors. There are 4 areas. You might even say 4 directions, because we're going to talk about a compass. There's 4 directions that need to be solved for as it relates to a leadership team being refreshed. So the first, and we'll just walk through each of these briefly, is alignment, which is what we call the North Star, which is why it's red. The East, which is engagement. So this is in that executive leadership team as it gets refreshed, making sure that that leadership team has common understanding of values and supported behaviors so that it can hold itself to account to act the way it intends to act. In what we call the South is green for growth. We need to grow through the resistance. We need to grow through the resistance to change. We need to grow through the barriers that are in front of us. And importantly, we need to consider the inner barriers, the things that are between our ears. So important that we consider that in the South. A lot of times that's not covered, and it needs to be covered. What is the story the team is telling itself about itself? Is that the right story? How do we need to adjust that story to break through? And in what we call the West, which is execution. So let's look at those each in just a little bit more detail. Before we do, though, this is what we call the news compass: north, east, west, south, NEWS. And so this is some intellectual property that's used at many of the world's leading organizations in the US, in Europe, here in ANZ. And Lighthouse has the exclusive license to this tool set in ANZ. Why we love it? It's simple. Any organization, people get a compass. They sort of go, oh, okay, I get that. But it's not simplistic. So it's simple, but not simplistic. Underneath here, and a few of us in our business have master's degrees in coaching psychology, which is quite nerdy, but I happen to love it. In here, there's goal theory, there's motivation theory, there's behavioral coaching, and it all sits in one model. And it's quite powerful. So it's simple, but not simplistic. And the last thing that we love about it is that it's important to solve all 4 of these things at the same time. So please don't miss this in our masterclass today. If you just solve for alignment without engagement, you're missing it. because ultimately things will just, they will, a team will drift out of alignment. It's just part of the human experience. They will drift out of alignment. So we have to come back to engagement about what the team values most, how the team wants to behave in the East. Similarly, you really, and organizations are overweight on the North and the West. We love strategy and direction, and we love execution, right? Teams and organizations, particularly in the West, which is Australia, the US, Europe, overweight North and East, or sorry, North and West. And so you can't solve for execution, right? Which is where we so desperately want to go many times, without solving for empowerment in the South. Because until we think about the barriers that are in front of us, we're not going to be able to execute the way that we really intend to. So for the purposes of our conversation today, I really want you to think about how your organization can solve for all of these things at the same time. Because it's not very helpful to send the HR team away and ask them to come back with our values if they're not connected to our strategy, if they don't consider what needs to be broken through, or if they're not tied to execution. I'll probably emphasize that enough. Before I move on though, does anybody have a story perhaps about where you've seen these things solved in isolation and been suboptimal? You may not, but you may. I'll give you a second. Is any examples of times when you've solved for one, but other stuff has fallen down perhaps? Thinking caps are on.
And so I have an example where we're an aged care conglomerate, and our team know exactly, what we have planning and execution to the wazoo. But my executive team came to me, and this is kind of like a magic moment given what we're talking about now. And they said to me, we don't know where we're going anymore. It's like, we know, but we don't know. And so we're about to have a refresh. And this is just an ideal kind of meeting. I was stunned to see it come up. So they were going to do it.
Linda.
So that's my contribution.
I appreciate that. So we're going to spin through each of those four quickly, and then I'm going to ask, so be prepared, be paying attention. I'm going to ask you in another poll, which of the four, when we think about your team, is the strongest and the weakest? So I'm going to give you a chance to consider that. So let's start with the North, what we call alignment. So two things. The team is clear and aligned about the strategy and direction. And what we find the key here is the team needs to co-create this. They need to co-create that strategy and direction and not have it handed to them from some other place, because we connect to what we create. If there's a principle for motivation, it's that we connect to what we create. Secondly, that leadership team needs to effectively communicate and be able to cascade that strategy. And many lead teams here just assume this is happening. They don't give it enough attention, and it causes all sorts of issues. So that's alignment. Secondly, so if we go to the East, you're thinking about engagement. So number one, does the team engage positively together? Going back to, I think it was Simon's comment, like, are we demonstrating good communication? Do we trust one another? What's the accountability look like? And I've been working with a team recently, a large multinational, and the misalignment of KPIs has them tied in knots. And so they want to behave perhaps in a certain way, but their KPIs are so conflicting. It's a very challenging moment for them. So they've had to go back to the proverbial drawing board and think about how they're measuring themselves, because it's not leading to the kind of collaboration they want. Secondly, in the East, is the team defining and enabling the culture that's best suited for its stakeholders, for itself, its people, its customers? And what we find is that most organizational cultures, every organization has a culture, but very few are consciously created, queried, questioned, and adjusted. So that's the East. In the South, remember, this is the green, this is the breaking through. number one, is the team aware of the barriers? Not just the market and the lack of resources, that's important and valid, but also the internal barriers and challenge. And is it empowered to discuss and resolve them? Can it put a name to the barrier and discuss it specifically and experiment with ways to move ahead? And then secondly, does the team effectively lead organizational change? So that's about the empowerment aspect in the South. And in the West, execution. And I loved your comment, Wendy. You know, we got execution out the wazoo. But actually, does the team have a track record of achieving the goals? And do those goals require the contributions from all the team members? Because secretly, or maybe not so secretly, many ELTs are a group of functional leaders. So Wendy leads finance, Rowan leads HR, Andrew's got supply chain covered. They're functional leaders who gather at a table, virtual or physical, but they actually don't solve much of anything together. So what we want to emphasize is, do they solve something important together and requires everyone to contribute? And then secondly, does the team deliver the business performance in line with expectations? So it's a bit like Maslow's great hierarchy of needs. Ultimately, unless the team does that, there's going to be some reckoning down the track, isn't there? So now I'm going to get you to think about your team, but I'm going to get you to do more than that. So I'm about to put something in the chat. So for those of you who perhaps haven't used every different part of Zoom, you can send files through Zoom. I'm about to put a file in Zoom, and I'm going to ask you to download it if you haven't already. So here is what you were all sent when you registered for today's masterclass. Hey, some of you downloaded this and completed the self-assessment. Many of you didn't. That's okay. The file you were sent as you registered is the same file I just put in the Zoom chat. So what I'd ask you to do now is, again, thinking about that team that's on your mind, go into Zoom, open the file on your desktop, and complete the 8 questions. Only 8 questions. Or maybe you've already done this in the lead up to the masterclass, in which case you get 3 minutes off.
It didn't come through, Eric. If you want to paste it in the chat again.
Oh, I got to hit the blue button. Thanks, Mick.
No problems.
So now, if you didn't complete this prior to joining the masterclass, now you can double click on that, open it up. Now, when you get that file open, all you have to do is answer the 8 questions numerically in that 1 to 5 column. The math will do itself magically through the magic of Excel. You'll be given a result. So 5 is best, 1 is worst. So a 5 means we're amazing at this as a team. And a 1 is we are very, very bad at it. So I'll give you 3 minutes to do that, and just pop in chat if you need any help. I don't want to disrupt people, but put something in the chat if you need help.
Cherie, you can't see the file or the polls.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not seeing anything coming through. It might be just my setup.
If you can't see the file, if you go to your email, I think it might have been from Paula, you would have a file in your email box. So when you registered, you were sent this file. Otherwise, grab it out of the chat. Give everyone 1 more minute to populate those numeric opinions on the team that's on your mind. About 30 more seconds, and then I will launch the poll. Okay, so on the off chance that some of you haven't had a chance to do that math in the spreadsheet, as I launch the poll, feel free just to go on instinct and tell us which of these factors you believe is the strongest for the team that's you're thinking of, and which is the weakest. So whether you did it numerically and you've got a great number to go off of, or whether you're just thinking about that team now, have a go at answering the poll. Which of the four are you the strongest at, and which are you the most challenged with? Great, we got just about half of you have completed that poll. Just keep those coming in, please. So just while you're completing the poll, one of the things we also love about that news system that we talked about, that compass system that we use with our leadership teams, is that it gives you some measurement. So you can, when you start working with your team, you want to be able to figure out, where am I picking them up? Are they 1 out of 5? Are they 2? Where are they now? And then once you've worked with that team over a number of months, where have they arrived? So you want to have some way to measure progress. And this is the way that we do it. So great, we're at 68% complete. I'm going to give you another 30 seconds. So even if you don't have a numeric number from the spreadsheet, tell us, where do you think the team is at? What's the strongest? What's the weakest? I need 3 more completions, 2 more completions. Okay, well done. We're there. We're over the threshold. Let's show you what we got. A very interesting distribution. So strongest north and west, which is what I would have predicted, right? This is quite typical for teams and organizations. We are least strong in the south and east. Okay, and we're weakest in the northeast. So interesting, quite a distribution. So obviously there's individual teams. So as we progress, just keep your team in mind. But it's quite interesting that weakest in the south in both polls. I don't know if we might have misconstrued that or what, but either way, what we typically find is that teams are better in the north and in the west, or at least that's where most emphasis is placed. So well done all. Hope you enjoy that little bit of auto-calculated math. Great. So we've had a look at our 4 factors. You've had a chance to think about your team. So what I want to do now, and this was, when you signed up, we promised a few case studies. So I'm going to walk through 4 case studies, and as we look at each one, I'm going to ask for someone to volunteer. Like, we'll start with the north. So from an alignment perspective, the common struggle is that leaders hold these allegiances to their function, not the enterprise. So the common struggle, as we talked about before, is that I show up to the leadership meeting primarily worried about sales, and Marcia shows up primarily worried about marketing, and maybe Mark comes just with a supply chain hat on. So that's a quite common struggle. And so this lack of enterprise thinking or lack of alignment leads to quite a lot of siloed behaviors, right? We hear about siloed behaviors quite a lot. And there's little proactive collaboration across functions. And so the pace of change exceeds our ability to deal with it. We get customers who aren't satisfied because operations didn't hand off properly to logistics. That happens all the time. So now the story, this is a a manufacturing business that I'm talking about now. And in their business, sales and operations were not aligned. In fact, sales were selling things that operations found quite difficult to produce and procure. Very frustrating, ineffective dynamic. And so this kind of had some conflict, as you can imagine, at the leadership team table. And this misalignment really cascaded down in the organization. And as a result, this organization was losing contracts, existing customers, because they were frustrated because the sales team were selling them things that they actually couldn't get their hands on for a number of months. Very, very frustrating. And so in this case, the solution was the lead team went back and explored the stakeholders and the stakeholder expectations and realigned themselves around what they needed to do to meet stakeholder expectations. So I guess the lesson here is that all interventions with teams need to be outside in. So stakeholder needs need to be the dominant discussion. What do our stakeholders need from this team? And they also need to be forward back. So when you work with a team, it's outside in. What do our stakeholders need? What are they asking from us? How do we meet those needs? And it's forward back. So it's not what they needed yesterday. It's what do they need today and tomorrow. So we want to have a forward view on it. So I do want to keep us on time, but I'd love if there's anybody in the group who, from the team you're thinking about perspective, is anybody like really strong or challenged in the North around alignment and happy to share? So if one of your scores was either really high or low in the North, love to hear from you.
That's Simon Cox again. I think that I rated us as high in the North. In fact, I got all my, only 8 of them, leaders to my leadership group, each of them, to do this quick survey this morning as well. And it was interesting to see the very broad difference between those teams that were functioning already well and those that weren't. But I think that what I found over the last 6 months particularly is that I've got 2 new teams and 3 established teams, of which 2 of those teams are performing poorly. And these 2 established teams are very much around our team and us, and they talk in that sort of universal language when they're talking about what they've got to do and how they've got to achieve it, understand their contribution to the bigger picture. And the ones that are underperforming are very much my team and I don't do it that way, or I do it this way over here. And I think that's that lack of bonding to the group speak and to the group objective, which is our challenge for 2023, is to bring everybody back onto the sole purpose of, fun, as I say, sending the biggest check to the shareholders, and then working backwards from that and breaking away from that individualism that seems to be endemic in the underperforming teams.
Oh, wow. Well done. You put your finger on the why they're underperforming. That's really, really good for all of us to hear, Simon. Thank you. All right, let's just have a quick look at I don't know if we'll do all 4 for the sake of time, but let's have a look at the second. So this is about, this is that east point in the compass. This is about the engagement of the team. And so the common struggle here is that we need individuals to step up and make cross-functional decisions. I had a client who told me, I don't have any problems in my organization except where my organizational boxes meet. That's what she said. My organization functions perfectly until I have to have things span one function to another. And then I get into all sorts of trouble. So this is the struggle, right? And what we want is we want everybody in the business to demonstrate this ownership and accountability and collaboration. This is what we want. We did a survey 3 years ago with senior leaders. Lighthouse did this survey, and ownership and accountability was off the charts. This is what every senior leader wants. And our experience is that most senior leadership teams get this to roughly right. I mean, nobody discounts or doesn't build ownership and accountability, but they get it right to the factor of 5 or 6 out of 10. And very few get it to a 9 out of 10. And as a result, we've I think we coined the term, or maybe we read it. The term is role deflation. And when you have role deflation, everyone in the organization is doing the job of the person that reports to them. And as a result, the senior leadership team is never working on the business, they're in the business. when you interview the SLT at the end of a quarter, they're exhausted and they say things like, once again, we dragged the result across the line, right? So the senior leaders are exhausted. Everybody's doing the job beneath them because we've got these failure to walk the walk, failure to hold people to account, right? So from a leadership team perspective, the story here is about this construction company, and they wanted to build accountability and ownership. And secretly, once they did a bit of forensic on it, they discovered that it was them looking in the mirror as the senior leaders who were not setting the pace. And as a result, they kept looking in the organization saying, where are the people stepping up? And the whole rest of the organization, the engagement results said, we're looking up at them saying, when are we going to have some direction and strategy around this place? So it was a very interesting dynamic. And so in this case, the solution was about investing the time to really think about that senior leadership team's values and behaviors and begin to, number one, demonstrate those more consistently as a team, but number two, celebrate where they see it in the business and recognize it in a more coherent way for the organization. And this is in some ways culture building 101, but it's, people are busy. So they just had to take the time to think through how to do this. And so if you take away something from this, it's about how does the organization, how do the senior leaders make values and behaviors explicit and then embed them into the discussion, embed them into the culture. And I'll do one more here. I'm mindful of everyone's time. I'm going to move to this last one about execution. So now we're in the West, in the blue part about execution. And the common struggle, right, is that we take complex issues where there's a lack of clarity about cause and effect, and we treat them as though they're complicated, right? So we haven't really understood the issue, but we wheel in all of our experts, and sometimes we hire consultants and ask for best practices and read books, but actually the problems themselves are complex, not complicated. And so as a result, we have a lot of activity in our organizations. We don't talk to anybody who's idle. And we get very short-term oriented, and they tick a lot of boxes in their week, but nobody, at the end of the quarter, people look up and say, wow, we haven't really moved the ball. And so the story here is around a manufacturing organization that builds equipment for mining sites. So very complex, huge pieces of kit, right? That places like BHP use in the mines. And so the challenge here was that revenue and profit were lagging plan. The leadership team was very siloed and very functionally oriented, and they were too busy to collaborate on what was the real issue. What's going on in our value chain that is really the problem? And so the solution here was identifying, like, what is our number one goal as a leadership team, as an enterprise? And then how do we unpick that goal into some contributing goals that are important for manufacturing, for operations, for customer service? What's the sub goals that are relevant? And how do we keep those teams on track to achieve their sub goals and keep them out of the whirlwind of the day-to-day? Because BAU oftentimes overwhelms us and we don't focus on the things that are important. So this was a means and a method to get scorecards going so that all the functions contributed toward the overall success of the enterprise. And so that's an example of something in the West where we're connecting the activities that we do to the strategy that we have and making sure that at the end of the quarter, we all look up and say, wow, we can see how we've achieved our most important goals. And ideally, there's not 10 of those. We've achieved our most important goals by making sure that everyone in the organization plays their part in an accountable way. So I gotta finish on time, but I will ask, Does anybody have any examples from your organizations or your past history about execution, maybe in this idea of connecting activity to strategy? Why is it, or where have you seen this kind of overwhelming amount of activity, but not very many results? Any stories there? Perhaps not. That is okay.
I'll add one, Eric, if you like. I'm going to say that quite often organizations can fall into firefighting mode. So they're rocking up to work every day and their to-do list is being dominated by what's in their email that day, instead of thinking, well, actually, my strategic priorities for this year are and I should be working towards those strategic priorities. So spend 90x% of their time in firefighting mode, and their strategy becomes a side note that gets partial hearing, where it should be if we can get it focused, we can do it the other way around, where we spend the majority of our time on our strategic priorities and a little bit mopping up the firefighting.
Great. Thanks, Mick. Yeah, we got.
Can I just add to that? It's also about sometimes with that you're working where the loudest noise is, rather than the loudest benefit.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. All right, I'm going to hold true. A couple of you have asked, I'm just looking at the chat. You've asked for the prior examples, slides in green. So after the webinar, you'll be mailed, a synopsis of this. So you'll have access to this afterwards as well. Okay, mindful of time. So let's just talk. Hopefully that was really helpful. So the other thing that you might not have noticed in your Excel sheet, there's a second tab on that sheet. And the second tab is a place for you to think about your team and just maybe make a couple of notes. So if you happen to have that up, I'm going to give you 20, 30 seconds now. If it's on your computer, just type in what are you seeing? What would you like to take action on? We won't take too long, but I'll give you a few seconds to do that now. Set some intentions. Great. Well, obviously, you've got a chance to do that in your own time, using any template that you like. Before I move on, does anybody want to share? Is anybody bold enough to say, "Ooh, the first thing I need to do is," or the first thing we need to do might be?
Simon Cox again. I rated our team 2.8, so we're obviously in the you need to take some action phase at the moment. And so we have, not necessarily adopting this, but if I align what we're doing to this, we've had our alignment meeting this week. So we've discussed what our singular goal is for the year. And then our challenge is to execute on the bottom to the engagement and the empowerment. I think that's the biggest challenge, not just for us leaders, but also for leadership teams as well, is to do that in a way that is clear, but also it's that combination of engagement and empowerment, I think, is the biggest challenge, certainly the biggest challenge for me and my team, to not just make sure people are aligned, but make sure they're empowered to deliver it and come back and not fall into the trap of, I'll just do it anyway, or people running off doing things that aren't, as somebody just said, chasing the noise and not the output.
Great.
I think those two right and bottom boxes, certainly for me as a leader and for me as our team, is the biggest challenges to get right and get right quickly so that your execution is value add.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Well, super mindful of time. So we'll sort of move into wrapping up. So obviously, glad you came. Hope you enjoyed the ebook. So when you registered, you got the ebook, which has a number of this content in it as well. Hope you enjoyed the session today. We'd obviously love to hear from you and work with you if it's relevant and if it's something on your mind for 2023. So, you know, this thing that we do is called team navigation. We use the compass that we talked about today. What makes it unique, especially in this market, is that the IP itself is internationally proven. And secondly, we didn't talk about it today, but all of our facilitators at Lighthouse who do this program, this team navigation program, are former C-suite executives themselves. So very experienced business people who know how to move with a leadership team through a process using what we think is the best IP in the market. So that's what team navigation is. And we'd obviously love to connect with you after the session. Lots of ways you can do that. Go to our website, send me an email, eric@lighthousegroup.co. Easy to find and really, really passionate about the topic. So thank you all very, very much for your participation today. And hopefully we'll end 1 minute early, which is always popular in the new year. And look forward to catching all of you in the market really, really soon. Have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks all. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks,
That was great.
Eric. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well done, Eric. That was